"Hey, Tom, come in here." Mrs. Hannah's voice echoed from the counter, stirring even the narrow alleyway with its sharpness. Tom was just walking past and stopped in his tracks, scratching his head. "Yes, ma'am. You called me for something. What for? How much do you owe me now?" Mrs. Hannah stood with her arms crossed, her tone harsh. Tom gave a sheepish smile. "My mom hasn't sent the money yet. I'll pay you back as soon as I get it." "Duh. You're the worst kind of debtor, always drifting around, studying half-heartedly. Don't worry, ma'am. I swear this time, once I get money, I'll pay you right away." "You say that every time." Tom grinned, half joking, half serious. "If I can't pay this time, I'll offer myself as compensation. Your body like a dried-up toad. Who would want that?" Mrs. Hannah burst out laughing, scolding him playfully. Tom winked. "You don't know skinny guys are the real pros, do you? Pros at what?" She narrowed her eyes at him. "You know bedroom stuff. You really only have a smart mouth." A few moments later, joking turned to recklessness. Tom crossed the line and made a bold move that left Mrs. Hannah furious. Smack a slap landed straight across his face. "You little brat! I'm old enough to be your mother. Get lost!" Tom, humiliated, backed away, muttering under his breath. Crazy old witch thought I was serious. A few days later, Tom stopped by the store again. He called out loudly, "Mrs. Hannah, Mrs. Hannah," but there was no response. The door was slightly ajar, so Tom took a chance and stepped inside. What he saw made him freeze in shock. Mrs. Hannah was in a compromising position, clearly tending to her loneliness with a dildo, startled by the sound. She turned around, her face flushing with embarrassment. Tom chuckled, his voice laced with mockery. People who talk about morals all the time usually have the weirdest secrets. He sat down on a chair after a moment. Mrs. Hannah came out, her expression subdued. "I live alone. My husband passed away. My kids are far away. I'm still a woman. You know I have desires, needs. At this age they call it a second spring. Sometimes it's hard to control." She placed 5 million dong on the table and spoke softly. "Keep today to yourself and consider your debt." Cleared. Tom took the money, eyes glinting. "If you need me, just call. A real man is better than plastic. You are not broke after all." He brushed her cheek lightly, then walked out. Since that day, Tom's words echoed in Mrs. Hannah's mind. One evening, after much hesitation, she texted him, "If you're free tonight, come over. I have something to ask." Tom, absorbed in his game, didn't notice the message right away. Over an hour later, he arrived. The door wasn't locked. He walked in and heard the sound of water running in the bathroom. He moved closer and gently slid the door open. "Tom, what are you doing?" Mrs. Hannah gasped in alarm. "You asked me to come over, wasn't it for this?" She looked flustered, unable to answer. Tom stepped closer and closed the bathroom door behind him. Steam swirled thick in the air, blurring the mirror behind them. The small bathroom now seemed like it held only their two bodies drawn into the same rhythm. Tom pulled her close, holding her tightly against him. Their lips met soft yet intense, as if they had longed for this moment, for a long time. Tom tightened his hold around her waist, his breath unsteady. Mrs. Hannah tilted her head back, letting out a breathy sigh as Tom kissed along her collarbone. He whispered into her ear, "Do you like it better than your old toys?" She didn't answer, just wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled him closer, as if trying to escape the flicker of guilt that had just crossed her mind. But the body doesn't lie. It had craved this closeness for far too long. "Don't say anything," Mrs. Hannah murmured, her voice melting into the sound of dripping water. "Let me be weak, just this once." Tom softened, holding her tight. Water trickled down their backs. Their breaths tangled. Their hands found each other. Their mouths did too. No words, just instinct and emotion. Last night had been unexpected, but tonight was consent. In the damp, steamy space, every boundary seemed to melt away. Their clothes clung to their skin, then were slowly peeled off, like layers of armor they had worn for years. When their bare bodies finally met, it was as if they had fallen into a void, where only the sound of heartbeats and burning gazes existed. They weren't in a rush. Every touch, every embrace was a spark rekindling a fire long buried. It wasn't just lust, it was a release for two lonely souls who had somehow found each other, as if destined to cross paths. Let us now dive into the story of Tom and Hannah. Mrs. Hannah's bedroom was normally simple and tidy, but tonight the atmosphere was strangely different. Every lit bulb, every curtain fluttering gently, seemed to breathe, anticipating something unusual. Tom entered quietly, closing the door behind him. There was no sound of a lock. He knew. Hannah feared gossip, but this time she said nothing. She just sat at the edge of the bed, hands clasped, eyes avoiding his. Nervous, Tom asked, his voice softer than usual. She shook her head slightly, but it was clear she was trembling. Not from fear, but from something else. It had been too long since she had truly felt like a woman. Tom moved closer, leaned down and looked at her, not teasing, not loud. Gently he brushed her hair aside. The simple gesture made this 45-year-old woman feel like a young girl again. "You're beautiful," he whispered. She smiled, eyes glistening. In that moment, age roles, the past and propriety, everything faded like mist. All that remained were two people, one longing to be loved, the other searching for a place to belong. Her nightgown slipped to the floor, their silhouettes merged into one like shadow and light. No more words, only sharp breaths, trembling touches, and a night that felt infinite. Tom was no longer the lazy, foul-mouthed boy hanging around the convenience store. He had transformed into a man, attentive, sensitive, able to make Hannah shiver and gasp in moments no one else would witness. The soft creaks of the bed became part of a symphony filled with raw desire. Mrs. Hannah never imagined that at her age she could still experience a night so strange, so familiar, so blissfully shameful. But she had no regrets. They lay together as dawn approached. Tom slept soundly like a child, while Hannah remained awake, staring at the ceiling, her heart in turmoil. Was this merely a transaction, a physical arrangement, or something more? She didn't know, and perhaps she didn't want to know. At least not yet. All she knew was that in the cold, lonely night, she had been warmed for the first time in years. She fell asleep without needing the vibrator, hidden beneath her pillow. What began as physical satisfaction soon stirred something deeper in her. Tom was no longer just a debt-ridden young man. Gradually he became a part of her nightly life. The scent of his sweat, the mischievous glint in his eyes when he teased her, the way he brushed her cheek and gave that sly smile. It all wrapped around her heart like threads of affection, binding her before she even realized it. At 45, Hannah had endured many pains, but a woman's heart is never too callous to feel. When Tom lay beside her, breathing evenly in his sleep, she felt like a teenage girl in love for the first time, nervous, bashful, and yearning to keep that warmth for herself forever. But Tom was different. After a few months, he started making excuses, busy with school, part-time, work gaming. Her messages were answered less and less. Sometimes 2 or 3 days passed without a word. Rumors reached her ears. Tom was dating a girl who worked at the milk tea shop down the street. One day she saw it with her own eyes. Tom riding his motorbike, with that girl behind him, his hand resting on her thigh, laughing brightly. Hannah was devastated. That night, she sat in silence in her room. The TV was on, but she wasn't watching. A half-finished glass of wine trembled in her hands. Her lips quivered. Was I just stupid, she wondered? A young guy willing to sell himself for money. How could he possibly know what true affection was? But if it was only about the body, why did her heart ache so much? Tom came home late that night. He opened the door and saw her sitting quietly, her eyes filled with sorrow. He gave a faint, uneasy smile. "Did you call me for something?" Mrs. Hannah looked at him. Her voice choked. Tom, you're seeing someone else, aren't you? Tom hesitated for a moment, scratched his head and gave a dry laugh. You're overthinking. We young folks hang out with friends for fun, that's all. Mrs. Hannah stood up, her voice trembling with hurt. Fun? And what am I then? Just someone to use and walk away from. Tom stayed silent. Then he stepped forward and embraced her. You're thinking too much. I still need you. But she knew his arms no longer carried the warmth they once had. Her tears started to fall, not because of the money, but because she had given her heart to someone who didn't deserve it. Mrs. Hannah wasn't a fool. The next morning she sat alone, deep in thought. She couldn't let this go any further. If Tom kept fooling around with that girl, she wouldn't just lose money and pride. She'd lose her heart, too. That afternoon when Tom arrived, and hadn't even taken off his shoes yet, she was already sitting on the sofa, her face cold and stern. Sit down, I need to talk. Tom gave a nervous smile, barely getting a word in before she cut straight to the point. If you keep seeing that girl from the milk tea shop, don't expect another cent from me. Tom froze, helmet still in hand. You've been spying on me. I don't need to. Everyone in this neighborhood saw you riding her around, still trying to hide it. Tom scratched his head and sat down. His voice sheepish. I was just hanging out. It's not serious. Mrs. Hannah narrowed her eyes, her voice sharp as a blade hanging out. I didn't feed you and pay your school fees so you could hang out with someone else who gives you money every month, who covers your food tuition spending. I'm not stingy, but I hate being treated like a fool. Tom stayed silent from now on. If I catch you sneaking around with her again, don't blame me for being heartless. Tom lowered his head and mumbled, Yes, ma'am, I understand. I won't see her anymore. Mrs. Hannah leaned back and sipped her tea. Her heart was still a mess. She didn't know if she was doing the right thing or if she was turning love into a chain, but at least for now, she still had him by her side. As for Tom, he could only sigh. He never truly loved anyone, but how could he survive in the city without money? Since the day Mrs. Hannah confronted him, Tom had behaved himself, but behaving didn't mean he was happy. Mrs. Hannah no longer gave him money like before. The reason was clear. If you want comfort, you have to stay loyal. Tom began to feel the bite of hunger. He had no money for snacks, begged cigarettes from friends. He could only watch from outside as his buddies played games in the internet. Cafe. His friends scoffed. Washed-up gigolo, they muttered. Worse. The girl from the neighborhood, the one he had been secretly seeing, dumped him. What's love without money, she said, slinging her backpack over her shoulder and hopping on a motorbike with an older guy who drove an SH. Tom felt discarded by the world. One evening he showed up at Mrs. Hannah's house. His eyes were sunken, his face pale, shirt wrinkled. He sat on the porch without a word. Mrs. Hannah opened the door and looked at him for a long while. Hungry, aren't you? She asked. Tom nodded. She turned around and went inside. A few moments later, she came back with a hot meal. Tom ate like he hadn't eaten in days. Afterward, he sat in silence, head down. Mrs. Hannah poured a small glass of wine and placed it in front of him. I'm not a bank for you to keep withdrawing from. I also don't need someone beside me just because they're starving. But if you're sincere, I'll give you more than you ever imagined. Tom looked up. His eyes met the gaze of a seasoned woman. You mean it? I've never joked. A moment later, Tom stepped into the house and quietly hugged her from behind. No more teasing. No more cocky grins, just someone who had nowhere else to go, looking for something or someone to hold on to. And the woman, she opened her arms. Tom changed completely after that night. He was no longer the cocky, mischievous boy who used to make snide jokes. Whenever he came to Mrs. Hannah's house, he greeted her gently, asked about her day with genuine care. Sometimes he even helped her with the store, sweeping the yard, mopping the floors, quietly tidying things up. Nothing extravagant, but enough for Mrs. Hannah to notice the difference. That evening, it rained steadily. The power went out in her house, Leaving only the flickering light of a candle on the table, Tom sat beside her, pouring wine into 2 small glasses. He raised his glass slightly. A toast to the woman who feeds me, warms me, and makes me feel needed. Mrs. Hannah blushed, trying to look away, but Tom gently caught her hand. "You know," he said, "I used to think I only needed money or fun, but these past days when you weren't around, I really felt something missing." She looked away clearly, flustered. Tom scooted closer. "I don't want to be someone who just takes your money and disappears. I want you to see you're still incredibly attractive." Before she could react, Tom leaned down and pressed a slow, respectful kiss on her shoulder. Mrs. Hannah shivered, as if something deep inside her had just been awakened. A feeling long forgotten, he whispered in her ear. "You're beautiful." The way a woman with experience becomes irresistibly alluring, not in the way makeup tries to fake it, but the kind of beauty a man can't forget. She turned to look at him, her eyes shining. For the first time in many years, she didn't feel like an aging woman, begging for scraps of affection. She felt desired, longed for. Tom wrapped his arms around her tenderly, as if every movement came from the heart. That night, they didn't just lose themselves in lust. For the first time, they touched something fragile, people often call love. The next morning, pale sunlight seeped through the window, lingering in the room like a gentle memory of the night before. Mrs. Hannah woke slowly, her body still wrapped in a silky softness that carried traces of warmth and wine from the night. Next to her, Tom was still fast asleep, one arm gently resting on her waist, as if trying to hold on to something fragile. She turned to look at his youthful face. This man, nearly 20 years younger than her, and felt her heart flutter like a girl in love. For the first time, a part of her wanted to wake him up, but another part feared breaking the tenderness of that moment too soon. Birds chirped in the garden outside. In the distance, the familiar morning sounds of the market drifted in. Quietly, she slipped out of bed, pulled on a thin robe, and stepped out onto the porch. The air was still warm with the smell of damp earth and the aroma of tea she had just begun to brew. It brought with it a sense of calm and a dreamlike warmth. Tom woke not long after, stretching lazily as he walked out, tousled hair and sleepy eyes. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his face against her back. "I've never felt a morning as peaceful as this," he murmured. Mrs. Hannah smirked, but her eyes said nothing. There was something deep within her, an awareness brought by time. She knew that beautiful things are often fragile, especially for a woman who had lived long enough to understand the price of believing in something too enchanting. "Tom," she asked softly, her voice calm, "if one day I run out of money, would you still want to be with me?" Tom was silent for a moment, then he held her tighter. "I can't promise anything forever, but I know that right now, I want to be here with you." An honest answer. No embellishment. Mrs. Hannah gazed into the distance. It might not have been the fairy tale, love she once dreamed of, but it was real. And sometimes, for a woman who has already lived through half her life, that's more than enough. That morning, after weeks of passionate, almost surreal days together, Mrs. Hannah began to notice something strange in her body. Her head felt light. Her taste buds had changed, and most noticeably, sudden waves of nausea would strike her in the middle of cooking. At first she thought it was just a minor cold, or maybe she was overtired from restless nights, but as the symptoms kept returning with increasing clarity, a strange sense of intuition crept into her mind. It was a mother's instinct, one she couldn't mistake, having once carried a child before. That afternoon, quietly and discreetly, she went out to buy a pregnancy test, hiding it carefully in her handbag. She waited until Tom left to play soccer with friends, then stepped into the bathroom with trembling hands. When 2 red lines appeared clear and undeniable, Mrs. Hannah sat down on the toilet, face in her hands. Pregnant. At nearly 50, with a man 20 years her junior, she didn't know whether to cry or laugh. That evening when Tom came home, she didn't say a word. but her eyes followed him more closely than usual, studying him, silently weighing how he might react. Finally, she couldn't keep it in. She placed her glass on the table and spoke with a steady voice. "I'm pregnant, Tom." The apartment seemed to fall into a heavy silence. Candlelight flickered across Tom's face, revealing a mix of shock, confusion, and a hint of fear. Are you sure I just tested? It's real." Tom stood up, walked a few paces, as if trying to breathe through the news. Mrs. Hannah remained still, watching him, her heart pounding, part of her longing for reassurance, another part dreading the worst. Eventually, Tom returned, sat down slowly in front of her. "I don't know what to do. Hannah, I honestly didn't think this would happen, but I'm not going to run away." Tears welled in her eyes, not because it was a promise of forever, but because it was all she needed in that moment. "Honesty. Maybe I won't be able to keep it," she whispered, "but I'll try even at my age. And if the child comes to us," she added, "it's a gift." Tom held her hand tighter. For the first time, he no longer called her Ma'am Hannah. "Let's do this together, okay?" She nodded, though her heart was still filled with uncertainty. But for the first time, she understood. Sometimes a child doesn't arrive to ruin things. Sometimes it arrives to give two lost souls a reason to dream of a real future. Would you like to add a twist, perhaps a hidden past or a family inheritance scandal in the next chapter? Ever since Mrs. Hannah found out she was pregnant, Tom changed noticeably. He was no longer the playful, carefree young man. Even his gaze had grown quieter and more focused. Every morning before she even woke, he would get up early to cook porridge and boil herbal tea for her. The dishes were simple, even bland, but they warmed her heart more than any luxury could. The once lonely little house now felt unusually cozy. Tom swept the yard, washed the clothes, cleaned the floors. One rainy day, he even trudged through the mud just to buy a handful of spring oranges because she mentioned craving them. He returned home soaked, but his eyes sparkled like a child who just scored high on an exam. "You know what?" He grinned while rubbing her feet dry. "From now on, I'm not allowed to let this future mum feel sad or tired anymore. I may not be the best man out there, but I'll be a good husband, a good father." Mrs. Hannah laughed through her tears. It had been so long since anyone called her future mum. That word, once a buried longing, now filled her with an overwhelming joy. At night, Tom would lie close beside her, his arm around her belly, like he was afraid someone might steal what was inside. He whispered nonsense to the unborn baby, as if he were already speaking to a small growing soul. "Hey there, I'm your dad, Tom. I'm not great at a lot of things, but I love your mum so much. When you're born, I hope you'll be strong like her, gentle and grateful for this life." Mrs. Hannah stayed quiet, listening to his soft whispers, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. She finally understood. Love doesn't always begin with romance or ideal timing. Sometimes it starts with a twist of fate, one that forces people to grow up, to love with intention. No matter what trials awaited them in that moment, she felt peace. For the first time in years of chaotic living, she no longer lived just for herself. The news of Mrs. Hannah's pregnancy spread like a quiet storm. At first, everything seemed calm. Then suddenly whispers swept through the extended family within days. It started when she went for a checkup at the local health center. Quiet and discreet as she was, she didn't expect the young nurse, who happened to be the daughter-in-law of an old family acquaintance, to spot her name on the ultrasound slip. Soon the story of a woman, nearly 50 pregnant, rippled through every street vendor teacup conversation and hushed gossip behind her back. That evening, her phone wouldn't stop ringing. On the other end was her older sister. Voice sharp as scissors slicing fabric. "Have you lost your mind, Hannah? At your age, getting tangled in that kind of relationship?" "Who is it?" her sister continued furiously. "That boy that Tom, you've been supporting. You think this is some kind of joke, dragging our family's name through the mud." Mrs. Hannah stayed silent, unable to get a word in. Her sister kept going. her words increasingly loud and cutting. Eventually, Hannah could no longer hear clearly, just a ringing in her ears and a deep shame rising to her throat. That night, she sat on the porch. Tom brought out a bowl of hot porridge, but she shook her head. He saw her red eyes and sat beside her. His voice soft. "They found out, didn't they?" She nodded slightly, a few quiet tears falling onto her dress. "I'm sorry, Tom. I dragged you into this. You didn't deserve the shame." Tom gently wiped her cheek, like a parent comforting a child. "Why are you apologizing? You're the only one living true to your feelings. They're just living in someone else's shadow." Mrs. Hannah smiled through her tears. Though her heart still felt heavy, Tom's words made her feel less alone. The next morning, her sister arrived from the city. She stood in the yard, arms crossed, eyes cold and judgmental. Hannah saw her familiar figure, stern face, firm stance. "Come out here, we need to talk." Her sister demanded. Tom, who had been cutting grass in the garden, stood up. Hannah motioned for him to stay back. "I'll handle this," she said softly, then stepped out onto the porch. It was the first time she decided not to hide anymore. Her sister stood in the yard, arms folded, her eyes burning with disappointment and anger. "How long are you going to play this game?" she demanded, her voice like gravel, scraping through clenched teeth. "The whole family is talking. They say you've lost your mind, nearly 50, letting some young punk walk all over you." Mrs. Hannah didn't respond. Her sister stepped closer, her voice rising. "Have you thought about your daughter? About our parents? You're pregnant by some kid with no background, living off your money, and you call that love. Tom's not like that," Hannah said, quiet but firm. "He's never once asked me for a single cent." Her sister scoffed. "Oh, really? Then how does he live? Who pays the bills? The food, the motorbike?" "He's clever, sweet-talking old women. You think he loves you? He loves your savings account, your house, your pension." Her words cut deep, not because they were necessarily true, but because they came from someone who had once shared her childhood. Her tears. "You think he's holding your pregnant belly out of love?" Her sister snapped. "He's here because of what?" Mrs. Hannah clenched her hands, summoning what strength she had left to stand her ground. Then came footsteps behind her. Tom, silent, steady, standing beside her. He reached out, took her hand in his, firm and unshaken. "I don't blame you for not trusting me," he said. "I'm young, aimless, easy to doubt, but I don't need anyone's belief. I just need Hannah to believe me. I'm not here for a house or a savings book or some title." He turned to her sister, his tone calm. "I'm here because I love her and the child she's carrying." Her sister laughed bitterly. "Love what kind of man lives off a woman, 20 years older?" Tom didn't answer. He turned to Hannah and said, "Let's go back inside. You don't owe anyone an explanation." Hannah looked at him, then at her sister, the girl who once stood by her side through every heartbreak. Now the first to judge her big sister, she said, voice steady, "I'm done living to please everyone. I live for what I believe in. This child is what's left of my life, and no matter what happens next, I won't regret it." She turned slowly and walked back toward the house. Tom walked beside her, still holding her hand like a quiet vow. Behind them were the stares of family neighbors and 100 versions of what should or shouldn't be. But sometimes living true to your heart is the bravest thing a woman with a past can do. Despite the gossip, the judgment, and even the silent rejection from her own family, Mrs. Hannah quietly chose to keep the baby. She offered no explanations, no complaints. Every morning she would gently rub her belly and whisper to the little one inside, "I'm here, my child. You can grow in peace." And Tom, he didn't leave. On the contrary, he became stronger in the face of rumors. He picked up labor jobs, hauling bricks, delivering goods, repairing bikes at night. Gone were the parties, the aimless days. Every coin he earned, he placed into a small box by the bed. "This is our child's future fund," he'd say. Despite her age, Mrs. Hannah remained remarkably healthy. The pregnancy didn't exhaust her the way others feared. On the contrary, it gave her purpose, a reason to hope again. Their tiny home, once filled with silence, now pulsed with warmth and laughter. Months later, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Tom held the child in his arms, eyes red with emotion. He whispered, "He looks just like you. When I see him, I see everything you've endured. I'll make it up to you from now on, Mrs." Hannah sat on the bed watching the father and son, tears brimming in her eyes. The day people said would shame her turned out to be the one that gave her a happiness she had never dared to dream of. The three of them lived in a modest house on the edge of town. They weren't rich, weren't prestigious, but they had enough to eat, enough warmth. The baby grew up in loving arms, surrounded by smiles and tenderness. People still gossiped, still whispered, but time faded those voices. When they saw Tom rushing through the rain to buy medicine for his wife, or carrying the baby through a flooded street, when they saw Mrs. Hannah glowing with laughter beside her. Two boys. People began to fall silent, and one day someone whispered a different kind of rumor. Maybe that boy really loves her. And for Mrs. Hannah, that was more than enough. She didn't need validation. She only needed to live the final chapter of her life with a man who cherished her and a child who brought unexpected color into a fate she thought was already written.